your music took you into political spaces. Perhaps political spaces drew you into music. I'm not sure which. But you grew up in a very conservative family, born in Ermelo, but grew up here in Joburg. And you chose progressive, non-racial politics for yourself. How did that come about?
This act of kind of familial disobedience.
Yeah.
Partly spurred on by the contradictions, the lies, propaganda, well-intended distortions of truth. So our racism was based on very sophisticated constructions of lies. Apartheid was based on a sophisticated lie. And being schooled in under Christian national education, all that things, just subtle things like when you turn 13, the boys have to come Wednesdays in brown uniforms, march. This thing of the communist danger, these felt and flake camps, they used to take kids away for 5 or 6 days where you have to, they're basically indoctrinating you and preparing especially the young boys for the army to fight an illegal war out in Namibia for the diamond fields. It's not the communists.
Yes.
It's got nothing to do with the communists, but this whole rooi gevaar thing. My act of first political defiance on some level when my mother explained the black and white photographs from Auschwitz as being kind of justifiable because the Jews had stolen the land. And this schism, which I can say thank you to her because something tore there.
Really?
It tore there. I felt this was not true.
It had gone beyond any kind of plausibility, or had you reached a point in your relationship with her where you would have pushed back anyway at a different point?
I mean, that's so interesting. Maybe it's with the death of my father, the veil was already torn. The reality had split. Nothing was as it had been, as it appeared or had been promised. But I think I had to separate from my mother. My father had been an advocate for me on some level. He was a protector. My mother was a very damaged woman and she did her best, whatever. But it was a very difficult, and I think she was intimidated by me also because I was reading, and on some level there was a point where I was also being able to counter her arguments in ways that she couldn't defend, and that was happening at school.
In the classroom as well?
Yes, with the history teachers, for example, religious studies, it was happening on many levels. And you kind of found yourself becoming oppositional. She's difficult. Or being called into the headmaster's office and they say, Jennifer, you're a rough diamond.
Where do you get those funny ideas?
Yeah. And where do you get the ideas?
Yes.
And it was, it's the Veld and Vleekamp commandant, the commandant.
Yeah.
It was run by military personnel. Called me in because I'd stood and questioned the creation versus evolution thing. Because it's like fundamentalist ideas.
Right.
And I stood and argued vehemently for evolution. And he called me and said, where do you get your ideas, my girl?
Girly, probably.
Yeah, where? What kind of family do you come from? That is like how... But I can say really where these kind of questions lead me to a place of the terrain of soul. Mm-hmm. And because I believe in soul, and soul, I believe, chooses incarnation. Soul chooses the parents. Soul chooses the place. And soul chooses the circumstances to optimally give it the growth that it longs for.
And while all this is going on, you're finding your way into music. And presumably somebody at some point says you can sing. And then presumably at a later point, you discover what you have termed your natural voice.
Yeah.
How did that journey work? Because some training to sing, I would imagine, can be quite constraining as opposed to liberating. And then as an older self, perhaps you find the voice that you really, really own. How was that for you?
I mean, my mother was trained in opera, so we would have opera being sung while she worked. She was a housewife. She'd worked in the bank, but with the kids and the whole story, and especially after my father died, she was at home, but she used to sing, really. So Bev Bombay, she had a beautiful voice. Mm-hmm. So I grew up with this kind of classical, the bel canto voices, and I had that. But then at some stage, I think like 12, or I listened to Springbok Radio. There was a 12 o'clock program and Joni Mitchell singing Hijira. No, Amelia.
Okay.
I was traveling, a beautiful song, God. And this, I recorded it on my little cassette. And I must have played it 1,000 times. It was the real, she's the goddess of singer-songwriting, you know, and the personal narrative and the guitar. And this blew open. And then I had this first boyfriend of mine who was killed on the border, who inspired Dickie Baby. He was a drummer, real peace-loving boy. He wasn't a hero, but he ended up going to the army and doing parabats and died on the border.
So that was a story out of your own life.
Oh, completely. I mean, Dickie Baby, I kind of took on a satirical aspect to it, but it's rooted in the real. But Gavin loved jazz. So then Stevie Wonder was like, whoa, what is this? You know, so these kind of textures. And by chance, Flora Purim, a Brazilian jazz singer. So I was picking up these things that took me out and way beyond the sort of classical piano that I was doing. And my classical piano teacher was you could say he was a anarchist.
Okay.
So
not words you often find in the same sentence without the word not. Yes.
So he used to sit, and because I hadn't practiced a lot, I used to engage him a lot.
Yes.
Conversations for hours. But his ideas were very stimulating. I learned more from his ideas than I didn't learn so much from piano. But it was these kind of things in a way that shook and shifted me. And the releasing of my natural voice, as I described once in Magaliesberg, deep in the Groot Mariko.
Yes.
By a fire with friends of mine that work with indigenous instruments and vocal overtones, even though the one is a professor of oboe and a Buddhist. But when he comes to Groot Mariko, he just puts all these things away, including the oboe.
The other part of himself.
Yeah, and we were down and we were close to the earth one night, and there was a real sense of, we could say spirits of the earth came through my voice, you know, and suddenly it was something that I didn't feel separate from, and this thing of serving the sound, letting the song sing, letting the sound sing. So that's become part of what I work with also when I perform.
Yes.
And I'll be doing some of that in Mpumalanga concert, Baxter's. I'll be sharing some of that kind of improvisation.
And letting it come out.
Yeah, improvisation, and asking. What I do is I go into the space and I ask in my heart, you know, what is needed for the space? What song needs to be sung?